All right, settle in. Tonight's story might make you squint into the darkness and wonder what is brushing against your toes under the blanket. And let me know in the comments where you re-listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far these sleepy tailies drift. This one's stitched together with soot, hunger, and echoes of forgotten names. A single candle burns on the sill, and behind it, you crouch. You're small, tired, cold. You've made it through another day without proper food. Your belly feels tight and hollow, like an unused drum. In some parishes, relief for the poor was linked to whether people thought you deserved it. Clipboard might be too generous. It was more of a slate and a stub of chalk. She knocked once, but didn't wait. Your mum had tried her best that morning. She combed your hair, sponged the dirt off your sleeves with a threadbare cloth, tried to make you look like something worth saving. But you still looked like a child-shaped question mark. Thin, curious, bent. If they decided you were lazy or unworthy, even starving wouldn't get you a second look. Hunger was seen as a lesson, a character-building exercise. Unless you were an orphan. Then, you were already marked, not for sympathy, but for labor. Not to help you walk, to keep your mind sharp. Feet scraping the cobblestones, skin tingling from the early frost. The sky looked like sour milk. Fog clung to everything like old cobwebs. You passed the butcher's window, now empty. A sign swung in the breeze, barely holding on. The church was still locked. No bells today. No one needed ceremony for this kind of thing. She pinned your sleeves up, kissed your forehead twice, and didn't say goodbye. You were heading to a place that didn't want you to feel safe. Some say they evolved from almshouses, natural responses to growing poverty. Everyone stared up at the ceiling, waiting for something to shift. Others believe they were built as a deterrent, a way to scare people into staying poor quietly. Either way, it spread, like someone sweeping very slowly, or breathing through their teeth. A brilliant idea, if you were the one writing the rules. A building designed to squeeze work from your bones, without ever using the word cruelty. You were led down a hallway with peeling paint and walls that echoed in strange ways. That was the first time it truly hit you. There's barely any fire left in the hearth, just a few dull embers glowing under the weight of ash. Not because they wanted to, but because there was nowhere else to go. The boots were hard. The socks were missing. Your toes curled instinctively, like they were bracing for impact. Some early workhouses sorted people into categories. Deserving or undeserving, industrious or idle. It wasn't just about need. It was about judgment. Your food, your chores, even your sleeping hours could depend on how they labeled you. You didn't know any of this yet, but you'd feel it soon enough. Cold floors and thin porridge were still better than sleeping in alleyways or starving in silence. That's what your mom told herself as she packed what little you had. An old shawl, a rusted spoon, a comb with half its teeth. She said it would be a fresh start. She talked about regular meals and warm beds, even though she couldn't look you in the eye while she said it. Still, you sit there, watching shadows dance on the wall like they've got somewhere better to be. That's your first clue. Shadows shouldn't have plans. A little warning before we begin. You probably won't survive this one with dry eyes. But tonight, it's not a label. It's the place waiting for you, the thing at the end of the lane. And the road that gets you there is paved with regular, ugly misfortune. You didn't ask where you were going. You didn't ask anything at all. Questions were too expensive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. He wore them the morning he left for the factory job. Just a shift or two, he said, with that dry little laugh that made your mum pretend to believe him. That was maybe 4 weeks ago. Or 5. It is hard to keep track of days when breakfast is more of a memory than a habit. Now, Close your eyes and picture a cracked window pane shivering in the wind. The phrase Victorian workhouse might sound like something you'd see in a museum, squeezed between mannequins in stiff waistcoats. You remember your father's boots. Heavy leather, cracked across the top, soles flapping like lazy tongues. And then your mum did something you didn't understand until much later. She wrapped the last stale biscuit in a handkerchief and gave it to you, her eyes far away. She didn't eat that day, or the one after. By the end of the week, you stopped asking when he was coming back. You started asking about soup instead. Here's your first strange fact of the night. The woman with the clipboard came on a Wednesday. 3 mouths, no income, the woman mumbled, not even meeting your eyes. That'll be Workhouse. The word didn't land like news. It dropped into the room like a stone in a bucket, heavy, dull, final. And here's the hard part. Some families walked in on their own. There's an odd little detail in this kind of boring history for sleep. That final night at home, you listened to the wind moving through the walls and wondered whether your new bed would be softer. When the sun was barely a thought behind the rooftops, your mum tightened your shoelaces. You walked in silence. She kept her hand on your shoulder the whole way, like she could steer your future through sheer will. And here comes tonight's mystery. No one can quite agree on where the first true workhouse began. At the gate, your mum was told to step aside. This wasn't just a short visit. This was where your name ended and your number began. The matron didn't smile. Neither did the boy behind her, the one who handed you a rough uniform that smelled like mildew and old soap. That first night, you lay in a long, narrow room with other children. No one snored. No one spoke. You tried to imagine biscuits, the flaky kind with jam, but instead you heard humming. Low, steady, somewhere out in the hallway. And you suddenly understood why the windows were so small. The shoes don't fit. That's the first thing you notice as you're led across the courtyard. The boots they gave you yesterday dig into your ankles, like they trying to shape your bones. Her hands move like clockwork, back and forth, as if she's forgotten there's anything outside of this motion. The others line up without speaking. One by one, you're handed a ladle of gruel gray, lukewarm, and just viscous enough to suggest it once thought about being food. You hold the bowl in both hands and sip carefully. It tastes like sadness filtered through a potato. You don't look around. Looking implies you're trying to connect, and connection here is a liability. She's barefoot. Her soles are thickened with calluses, hardened like bark. Push, pull, rinse, repeat. You're slow at first. Your back aches, your hands sting, and your boots are soaked from where water sloshed onto the floor. You're marched back to the dormitory in wet socks, each step making a soft squelch. There's no time to dry them. No fire waiting. Just a bed that feels slightly colder than it did last night. The girl beside you works twice as fast, barely glancing at the cloth. You wonder if she even sees it anymore. You used to play near the baker's shop, remember? The one with the fat pigeons and the cracked window. She's sitting by the window, even though it's not allowed. A safety net for the destitute. A way to provide food and shelter when all else failed. Others say it was a tool. You were told she was in a different wing. Or maybe she left. Or maybe she's just one wall away, scrubbing her own share of linens, wishing she could hold you. But here, that kind of closeness is a violation. Affection is rationed like soap, strictly, infrequently, sometimes not at all. A machine built to punish poverty by making it unbearable. Both might be true. Neither changes the fact that you're here, soaking in your own breath, waiting for the sun to rise. Her feet dangle above the floor as she hums something you don't recognize. It doesn't sound like a tune, more like a warning. You open your mouth to ask her name, but before a word escapes, the matron appears behind her and says nothing at all. You can't remember the sound of your father's laugh, only the shape of it, like a missing tooth in your memory. You remember he used to whistle, though. Always the same tune, off-key, but confident. You hum it to yourself one evening, very quietly, while scrubbing a pair of trousers that clearly belonged to someone larger than you. You'd press your nose to the glass, pretending to pick out cakes you could never afford. Wet, heavy, like it's pulling something up from deep inside. You lie still. You don't want to know who it was, because if you know, it becomes real. And real things in here tend to vanish. Sometimes the old woman behind the counter would shoo you away. Sometimes she'd just pretend not to see you. You wonder if she was born here, or if she just doesn't remember being anywhere else. You walk carefully, avoiding cracks in the stone, though you don't really know why. Maybe it's habit. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe you still believe that if you behave just right, someone will change their mind and send you home. Children in some workhouses were hired out to factories or farms. Not officially, of course, but deals were made. Agreements scribbled on napkins or whispered in alleyways. A child was worth a few coins a week if they could be kept fed just enough to stand. Some never came back. Or if they did, they came back quieter. You pass a girl sweeping the path. She doesn't look up. Your first full day begins in a room that smells like wet cloth and something sour beneath it. This is boring history for sleep, so let's pause on something odd. In some workhouses, children were made to walk silently between rooms and lines, separated by age and sex. They weren't allowed to speak during meals, sometimes not even during lessons. The silence wasn't a side effect. It was the rule. Just points at a door and waits for you to walk through. Inside, steam clings to the walls like a living thing. The smell of soap doesn't hide the mildew or the sour tongue of wet wool. Other children are already at work, bent over large tubs, their hands red and raw from the lye. A quiet child was a manageable child, but it had another effect too. It made everything echo. Every dropped spoon, every cough, every creak of the old wooden floor became its own tiny alarm. Your job for the day is laundry. At least that's what the man with the clipboard says. He doesn't introduce himself. You're given a brush and told to scrub. No instruction, no demonstration. Just a grunt and a nod. So you scrub. The rhythm is simple. After what might be hours, you're told to stop. You lie there, half awake, thinking about the street outside, the one that led you here. There's another strange detail, tucked deep into the dusty records. That girl with the sweeping rhythm? You see her again on your second night. Just a stare, long, dry, hollow, and the girl stands up and walks away. You don't try to speak again. That night, someone coughs in the dark. Not a normal cough. Now here comes a little historical debate, just to keep your brain half awake. Some scholars argue that the workhouse system was well-intentioned. You miss your mother's hands. Even when they were shaking from hunger, they were still warm, still familiar. You don't know where she is now. As the days blend together, your old life starts to fade, and suddenly, the girl beside you joins in. Just one note, a harmony, then silence, no eye contact. No words, but you smile anyway. Because in this place, even a single shared note can feel like a miracle. There's a pile of clothes in the corner of the sewing room, and every piece smells like dust, sweat, and the memory of someone who used to wear it. You can feel their stories woven into the seams, too faint to hear, too persistent to ignore. The fabric is heavy, not just in weight, but in what it means. You're no longer you. You're just another small figure in a long gray line. You're told to pick something close enough to your size, but nothing really fits. The trousers sag, the shirt pinches at the shoulders, and the cap keeps sliding over one eye no matter how you adjust it. In many workhouses, uniforms were deliberately shapeless and identical. Then, when you finally speak, it's too quiet. He repeats your number without looking at you. How to sit, how to walk, how to scrub, how to swallow your voice without choking on it. The girl next to you nudges your arm gently, just enough to jolt you back into your body. Some workhouses kept silence boards, signs placed in hallways reminding children not to speak. Even the laughter is cautious. Thin, like it's been wrung out too many times, and only a few drops remain. Not even once. He stares at the wall as he folds, methodically, perfectly. You ask his name, whispering just loud enough to be heard. Not during chores, not during meals, not even during breaks. If a child spoke out of turn, they might be forced to wear a sign around their neck. It's long and winding, the stone steps worn smooth from years of weary feet. At the bottom, you spot something odd. A smear of chalk on the wall, almost rubbed clean, but not quite. But now, you notice that everyone else is just as mismatched. Not enough to draw attention, just enough to remember something better. Counting steps in sevens because it feels like a spell. 7 days, maybe, until something changes. You're climbing it barefoot, each step warmer than the last. At the top, there's a door, just one. It's open. Inside, there's a table with real food. Potatoes, bread, jam, and a chair with your name carved into it. Another boy hums while sweeping, but only when no one's looking. Just a few notes at a time. A half song, scattered through the hallways like breadcrumbs. There's comfort in the collective discomfort. You're all wearing ghosts. Someone else's misery pressed into your shoulders, stitched into your cuffs. 3 crooked lines. A child's drawing, maybe. Or a message, something like lazy or talkative. Labels stuck not just to the body, but to the spirit. A perfect loop, red and frayed. No explanation. Just a symbol. You leave it there. It feels like something sacred. Secret signals, shared food, even hidden escape maps drawn in chalk and washed away before morning. We may never know for sure, but when you lie in bed that night, staring at that red thread, you start to believe it's possible. You say the answer. It's wrong. He doesn't correct you. He just moves on. They weren't meant to keep you warm. They were meant to erase you. Bright colors were banned. Pockets were stitched shut. Even comfort was seen as indulgence. These weren't clothes. They were signals. You belonged to the system now, and the system didn't believe in softness. You tug at the collar, stiff with starch, and wonder how many other children have worn this same uniform. It's a narrow room with slanted desks and cracked slates. The teacher is a thin man with a voice like a broom handle dry, straight and splintered. He recites passages from a book you can't see, then calls on students by number. Across from you, a boy is trying to button a coat that's clearly made for someone twice his size. The sleeves hang past his hands, flapping like wings that forgot how to fly. He doesn't complain. No one does. Complaints aren't useful here. They don't get you out. They don't get you fed. They just make the matron tilt her head with that expression, like she has already decided you want to last long. Let's pause on one of those peculiar truths tucked inside boring history for sleep. After your fitting, you're sent to the classroom, which isn't really a classroom. Not name, number. You're now 47. At first, you forget to respond. The lesson is about obedience. That's the real curriculum here, every day. Here's a bizarre little detail they don't mention in regular school books. You start to see it everywhere now. Not the signs themselves, but the way everyone moves with practiced silence. One afternoon, while folding towels in the linen room, you meet a boy who doesn't blink. He doesn't answer. But later, you find a piece of thread tied around your bedpost. Now comes a scholarly debate. Historians argue whether children in workhouses formed underground networks, tiny systems of resistance. Some say it's romantic nonsense. Others swear by it. The next day, You're assigned to clean the stairwell. You hesitate, then wipe it away, not because you want to, but because the matron is watching. She always is. Your boots still don't fit. Your shirt still scratches. And yet, there are small acts of rebellion. One girl has tucked a scrap of ribbon inside her sleeve. You see her fingers brush against it during chores. You start doing it too, humming under your breath, touching your thread. 7 steps, turn. 7 breaths, pause. That night, you dream about a staircase that never ends. You reach out to touch it, and you wake up, boots still wet, shirt still tight, number still 47. But in your pocket, you find something new. A small square of cloth, neatly folded, bright red. You don't know where it came from, but you know exactly what it means. You wake to the sound of metal. Not a bell, not quite. More like a pan being scraped against stone. It's still dark outside, the kind of dark that feels thick enough to drink. You blink slowly, unsure whether you've been asleep at all, or just lying there in that quiet gray limbo between yesterday and the next punishment. The boots wait by the bed. It sits in the far corner of the room, hulking and rusted, with levers and pulleys that groan like a beast trying to remember how to breathe. No one touches it unless told, and no one wants to be told. Still damp. It's heavier than the others, as if it remembers something awful and refuses to let go. Beside you, a girl named Elsie drops her brush. She stares at the press, not directly, just enough to let you know she sees something. Children work them in shifts, their bodies bent into shapes that machines could not yet master. One wrong move and fingers could vanish. Not metaphorically, literally. Still wrong. You put them on anyway. The steam rises higher, thick enough to hide everything above your waist. It clings to your skin, sticky and hot. Your eyes sting. You blink through it and swear you see a shadow moving between the racks of drying sheets. Not someone. Not quite. You're allowed to think. You're allowed to fear. Just another trick of fatigue and fog. But when you glance toward the wall, there's a set of wet footprints leading nowhere. Twice. No beginning. No end. Just steps. As if someone walked across the tile, barefoot and bold, and then vanished. But asking questions is dangerous. Taken to infirmary, they'd say, or sent to another facility. Records vanished. No one questioned it. And the laundry never stopped turning. Today, you're assigned to the laundry again. You thought maybe they'd rotate the children, give you a break, let you try your hand at mending or peeling potatoes. But no, back to the steam, back to the endless scrubbing and rinsing, over and over, until your hands are pale and rubbery and raw beneath your fingernails. The laundry room is louder today, not with voices, but with the strange creaking of the old gear press. You re-scrubbing a blanket that smells faintly of coal smoke and something else you can deplace. You don't ask what. You think about the steam, about the sheets that moved when there was no wind, about the shadow that didn't belong to anyone. There are rules, the scullery. You're told it's because of your size. But you know better. It's not music, not quite. That pain was part of learning. Easier than hauling coal or cleaning privies. So if you were lucky enough to be assigned to the laundry, that meant you weren't sick. You were strong. You were capable. You were worth putting through the cycle again and again. That you must become useful or be replaced. Now here is a strange bit of boring history for sleep. Some workhouses had laundry machines powered by cranks and treadles. The matron said it was about discipline. And now, here's the real twist. Laundry was often considered light work for children. As the gears rattle into motion, you count the turns. 1, 2, 3. Pause. You always pause after 3. You don't know why. It just feels right. Elsie whispers something you don't hear. Her lips move like they're casting a spell. Something. You tell yourself it's just the light. You want to look at Elsie, to see if she notices too. But she's not there. You check the doorway, the hallway, nothing. You return to your blanket. It's heavier now. Later, after supper, you hear her name being called during roll. No answer. And the matron just nods. Another oddity from this chapter of history. Missing children in workhouses were often blamed on illness. That night, you sit up in bed and trace a small pattern on the mattress with your finger. 3 lines. A pause. 3 more. The boy with the red thread watches you from his cot, but says nothing. His eyes look older than his face. You lie back and try to sleep, but the sound of the press won't leave your ears. You think about Elsie, and you wonder how many other names have been whispered away beneath that machine. The next morning, you're moved to a new assignment. You are asking too many silent questions. They never punish you directly. They just make things colder, the food thinner, the stairs longer. And as you kneel by the wash bucket in the scullery, scrubbing dried porridge off a tin bowl, you hear something through the pipes, more like humming, from the laundry. But that wing is closed today, isn't it? You notice him on your first day in the scullery, though you're not sure how long he's been there. He moves like smoke soft, slow, and somehow always in the corner of your eye. No one speaks to him, not even the older boys who joke when the matron isn't looking. He doesn't sweep faster than anyone else, doesn't scrub better, but somehow his slate is always cleaner than yours. You're not sure what number he's been given. No one ever calls it. He is just the boy with the pale hair and the strange habit of standing perfectly still for long stretches of time. Sometimes he doesn't even blink. And here's the part that's hard to admit. You start ending up near him, accidentally at first, sharing a bench, assigned to the same corridor, standing side by side while peeling root vegetables. It's not that he speaks. He doesn't. But there's something about the silence between you that feels thicker, less empty. On the 3rd day, during your shift in the back hall, you drop your brush. It clatters across the stone floor and comes to rest at his feet. He doesn't move, just stares at it. And when you finally kneel to pick it up, you realize his boots are dry, bone dry, even though your own socks have been wet since morning. And then, just as you stand, you notice something that makes your mouth go dry. He casts no shadow. Not metaphorically, but truly. Staff wrote of apparitions in the laundry, voices in the bread ovens, children whispering in rooms that had been locked for years. Not doing anything, just standing there, watching, the way he does in the hallway, in the scullery, in the yard. You never see him sleep, never see him eat. But sometimes, when you wake in the night, you find a fresh folded towel on the end of your bed. You never see who leaves it. One account claimed a girl kept appearing in census records decades after she died. Her name reappeared in different handwriting, on different forms. Always the same age. The light from the oil lamp swings gently overhead, casting long stretched silhouettes of you. The broom, the crate beside you. But not him. Nothing. The cot is empty, but the blanket is folded neatly, the pillow plumped, like it's waiting for someone new. You just nod and return to scrubbing, more carefully now, your heart thudding with a rhythm that doesn't match the sweep of your brush. The other children shift slightly away from him without meaning to. Every time the boy with no shadow sits beside someone, a child disappears within the week. Not fear, something older. Like a memory they don't even know they have. They are gray in the way, ash is gray after the fire has died. And he speaks again. Just 3 words. And when one boy, a loud, sharp thing with a chipped tooth, tries to tease him, the spoon in his hand slips. Straight into the fire grate. You blink, shake your head, look again. Still nothing. And bend unnaturally, as if it's being tugged by something you can't name. Soft ones, barefoot, always just one pace behind. You don't say a word. Later, while eating your ration of thin stew, you watch him again. No one laughs. Even the matron pauses. Here is something strange from the forgotten pages of boring history for sleep. Some workhouses were rumored to be haunted. The boy with no shadow starts showing up in your dreams. Until one evening, when your stomach turns and the cold won't leave your bones, and you whisper into the dark, "Are you real?" Silence. Then, from the cot beside you, a whisper so faint it might be a draft. Does it matter? The next morning, someone is missing again. A boy who used to sing quietly while polishing the window ledges. He's gone. No one says a word. At roll call, the matron scans the rows and hesitates for the briefest moment where he used to stand. Then she moves on. You notice something else now. You try to avoid him, but it's too late. He always finds you. And when you wake one morning with your boots perfectly dry, your comb teeth unbroken, and a folded towel beside your bed again, you know it's your turn. Not to vanish, not yet, but to understand. That night, in the hallway outside the scullery, he finally turns to face you fully. His eyes are not dark. They are not light either. You see now. Then he walks away. The lamp above him flickers once, then dies completely. And in the moment before total dark, you see your own shadow slip, stretch. From that day on, you start hearing footsteps behind you. And sometimes, when you turn a corner, you find that someone has already swept the floor ahead of you. But no one is there. The whisper spreads before the bread is even passed out. There's a way out. That's all anyone says at first. Just that one sentence, passed between scrubbed faces and chapped lips during laundry shifts and in the shadowy corners of the washroom. You try not to believe it. Hope is dangerous here. It cracks things open that are better left shut. But when the girl with the crooked braid tugs your sleeve after supper and nods toward the far stairwell, you follow. She never gives her name, and you never ask. She's older than you by a few years, but her face is tired in a way that makes it hard to guess. Behind the furnace room, if you go low enough, past the storage crates, there's a latch. Coal used to come through it, back when they still believed in heating children. She walks like someone who's already lived through the ending. You trust her immediately. "I've seen the chute," she whispers, once you're tucked behind the coat racks. She says it like a joke, but no one smiles. You just stare at it like it might start glowing. "Problem is," she adds, "the door's been locked since forever." That's when she reaches into her pocket and pulls out something impossible. But in the older buildings, where architecture was more creative than cautious, narrow shafts led to open grates behind gates that had rusted with time. The matron's office glows faintly at the end of the corridor, its single candle burning low. You count the seconds in your head. Some stories say children really did escape that way. Other records suggest they were crushed beneath sacks of coal while trying. The truth is smudged by soot and silence. A key, but someone has to keep the matron busy. Bent slightly, rusted around the edges, and tied with a length of string. You don't ask where she got it. But when she does, it slices. She sees everything. You're not sure if she ever sleeps. You're not even sure she's human in the way other people are. "There's one chance," she says. Your feet slap against the tile, boots screaming with every step. You wonder if maybe he's the only one who ever made it out. But the crate near the wall has been shifted slightly. You squeeze behind it, and there it is. You turn a corner, then another, and then dive into the cleaning closet, holding your breath as she marshes past. Your stomach turns at the thought. The matron doesn't speak often. You volunteer anyway. You drag yourself forward inch by inch, ribs brushing against the sides, breath shallow. Your hands find the groove of the metal as you twist your way downward, heart pounding with a rhythm that has nothing to do with fear anymore. It feels like waking up, because staying feels worse. Above you, the chute gapes open like a yawn. Here as a chilling detail from the annals of boring history. Coal chutes were sometimes large enough for a child to crawl through. Not always. That night, while the others line up for their final head count, you slip into the hallway and hide behind the stairwell door. Not the stale, recycled air of the dormitories, but the wild, sharp scent of trees and garbage and the faintest whiff of chimney smoke. 1, 2, 3. She steps into view. You take a deep breath and do something unthinkable. You drop a spoon onto the floor. It echoes like thunder. She turns. You run. Smiling, but only with her eyes. Not far, just enough to make her follow. In that moment, you think about the boy with no shadow. You wonder if he's watching, or waiting. When the coast is clear, you race back toward the furnace room. It's empty now. The girl is gone. The chute, open. You crawl inside. It's tighter than you expected, and the air tastes like soot and iron. You fall the last few feet onto a pile of damp gravel. You're outside, but it will be somewhere that doesn't require a number. Somewhere the shadows belong to trees instead of secrets. You can smell night, real night. You almost cry, but something stops you. A sound, soft footsteps behind you. You turn, and she's there, the girl with the crooked braid. "I couldn't let you go alone," she says simply. You don't know what to say, so you don't. You just walk, together, toward the woods or the road or whatever's next. You don't know what you'll eat or where you'll sleep. And as you cross the hill, the workhouse shrinking behind you like a bad story, you turn for one last look. In the highest window, you see him, the boy, still watching, still waiting. He lifts his hand in a slow wave, and for the first time, you see something stretch across the floor behind him. A shadow, not yours, not his, but hers. The girl who never came back from the laundry room. And maybe that's what freedom really means. Not forgetting, but choosing to remember, even when it hurts. Tonight as second story might make you squint into the darkness and wonder what is brushing against your toes under the blanket. We're heading back to Tudor England, where being poor wasn't just a temporary rough patch, it was a full-time lifestyle. And you, unfortunately, are at the bottom of that heap. Welcome to your new role. You're a Tudor peasant now. On the other side of the room, which is to say 3 feet away, your 3 children are piled like firewood, sharing a single coarse blanket. One of them has mysteriously lost their pants again. You stretch, swat a flea off your ankle, and step outside, barefoot because someone has borrowed your shoes again. Smoke curls from crooked chimneys, chickens loiter around the dung pile like gossiping old women, and the blacksmith is already banging something ominous in the distance. A neighbor waves, then immediately sneezes directly into his hand and wipes it on his tunic. You nod back, making a mental note not to shake his hand until after Lent. The mud greets you like an old friend, cold and familiar between your toes. Good luck keeping your dignity intact when your mattress is leaking straw. Your back itches in 3 distinct places. The stream's a walk, the water's freezing, and you still smell like garlic from Michaelmas. Your tools are waiting. A hoe with a cracked handle, a rake missing half its teeth, and a scythe that hasn't been sharp since Henry VI. Sunday was for church and resting, though some used it as an excuse to sneak an extra nap behind the pigpen. Well, many peasants believed that sleep was dangerous if taken all at once. Instead, they broke it into 2 chunks, first sleep and second sleep, with a quiet, reflective period in between. You use that time to think, pray, or complain quietly about your in-laws, which, let's be honest, is still a sacred ritual. You sling them over your shoulder and head to the field, trying not to think about the blister on your heel, that is now definitely becoming a second blister. But the church lady said if you don't cleanse your body, your soul might follow it into ruin. You decide on a face splash and a handful of mint leaves. And as you trudge forward, your back aching and your nose running, one thought repeats in your mind like a chant. Don't die today, don't die today, don't die today. That counts, right? There's a crack in the wattle wall, wide enough to see daylight through, and the roof still drips from last week's storm. Which sounds nice, until you realize it means you rent land from someone richer, fancier, and significantly less sweaty than you. And when rent is due, usually in the form of coin, chickens, or sacks of barley, they don't accept "my cow was moody" as an excuse. But the fire pit in the center is warm, and the ash glows faintly red. Because if it does, that means the barley will rot, the landlord will still want payment, and your only pig might catch another cough. Again. And left a note stuck in your door with something that may or may not be pig grease. You have until sundown to come up with what you owe, or you'll be fined. You gently redirect him towards sweeping the floor, which is mostly dirt, so the results are more spiritual than practical. Or worse, you might be forced to volunteer for extra duties like clearing dead hedgehogs off the road or hauling sacks of manure for the manor garden. You throw a few sticks on it and hope it catches, because there's no time for a second try. She's 10, which makes her a full-time worker now. Childhood isn't really a thing for Tudor peasants. Once you can hold a spoon without falling over, you're on breakfast duty. She hands you a bowl of gray, lumpy porridge that tastes like last week's regret. You eat it in 3 bites and hand her the bowl to scrape for the younger ones. You have animals to check, gruel to cook, and a field that doesn't plow itself. And your neighbor's goat is making direct eye contact through the hole in your wall. This is boring history for sleep, but not the kind that drones. This is the kind that smells like boiled cabbage and mildew, the kind you feel under your nails. The sun's not up, but you are, mostly because the rooster doesn't care that your dreams were just getting good. You sit up, trying not to inhale too much of the musty air that's thick with damp wood, human breath, and the ghost of last night's onion pottage. Your bed is a wooden frame stuffed with straw, in whatever fabric you could scavenge from dead relatives or overly generous cousins. Fleas are included, free of charge. The kind where you probably won't survive the week without developing an entirely new rash. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Let's see who's up at the most ungodly hour. The day begins in the most Tudor of ways, sore, itchy, and vaguely confused. You glance to your side. Your spouse is snoring gently, mouth open, probably dreaming of fresh bread and shoes without holes. The cottage is barely holding together. As you stand up, you feel the pop of your spine, adjusting to a lifestyle without ergonomic support. Outside, the village is yawning itself awake. Now, technically, you're a tenant farmer. Today is rent day. You know this because the landlord's steward visited yesterday, sniffed disdainfully at your thatched roof. Back inside, your oldest daughter is stirring the pot over the fire. One of those younger ones, your middle son, is attempting to invent fire using only 2 rocks and a lot of noise. Then comes the daily debate. Do you try to wash? By now, the sun's made a proper entrance, and it's time to get to work. Here's your historical fact for the day. Most Tudor peasants worked 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset, with breaks only for holy days, and when your foot was actually falling off. And the weird detail? Back in the present, you're squinting at the clouds, wondering if rain is coming. You mutter a quick prayer to St. Cuthbert and tighten your belt, which is mostly decorative since there's nothing under it to hold up. The day stretches ahead. Fields to till, animals to feed, and neighbors to avoid, because you still haven't returned that borrowed spade. You grip the wooden shaft of your flail and stare down the barley like it insulted your mother. The crop's stubborn, the chaff won't separate, and your arms are already trembling, and it's barely mid-morning. This is threshing, the most gloriously back-breaking task of the Tudor peasant's life. You swing, twist, beat, and repeat, hoping not to hit your own foot or the neighbor's youngest, who has made a habit of wandering into your work zone because he is convinced your flail is magic. You're in the shadow of the manor house now, the one with real windows and actual glass panes. Sometimes you catch yourself staring too long at it, wondering what it feels like to eat meat on a Wednesday or own something that wasn't previously owned by someone now buried. The barn smells like damp hay and old sweat. A chicken shrieks somewhere behind you, possibly being chased by your goat again. Child mortality was high, and even adults were one infected blister away from disaster. Medical care was, generously speaking, enthusiastic but misguided. Common treatments included leeches, herbal poultices, and prayers delivered with alarming volume. The floor is layered in a fine coat of dust that sticks to every inch of exposed skin. There was a widespread belief among rural Tudors that sneezing too, many times in a row, could cause your soul to accidentally exit your body. Some folks carried dried herbs in their pockets to prevent such an escape, or worse, to keep out the devil who might slip in during a particularly violent sneeze. You cough once, then again, and there's a twinge deep in your chest that you pretend not to notice. You lean against a fence post that wobbles dangerously, and for a moment, you consider just lying down right there in the field, letting the crows carry you off. But no, there's dinner to consider. Some records suggest they worked nearly constantly, while others claim a surprising number of feast days and festivals peppered the calendar. And something else you don't want to identify, and your thoughts are cloudy with hunger. But you're still moving, still breathing, still above ground. And in this world, that's enough to count as a good day. Maybe it depends on what you consider leisure. Is mending a roof on St. Swithin's Day really a break? What about mashing apples with your feet for cider? Technically fun, also extremely sticky. And your youngest needs you to repair her doll, the one made of cloth scraps and a turnip. On it sits a barrel of cider and a pig with a blue ribbon tied to its tail. Someone's wedding must be happening soon. You envy that pig more than you'd like to admit. It's supposed to protect against plague, but mostly it just makes you smell slightly less like old turnips. Your spouse says it's your best feature. Behind you, the barley rustles in the wind, whispering promises it can't keep. Because in this life, coughing doesn't mean you need a doctor. It means you're about 3 weeks away from becoming compost. You turn the soil, pick at weeds, and try to remember which parts of the field you already planted. The sun is merciless, but only in its refusal to warm your fingers. The wind picks up, carrying with it a scent of sheep, burnt bread, and something uncomfortably close to sewage. You wave half-heartedly, then return to your patch of earth. It's been yours for years now, by rent, not by right. But still, you know its dips and bumps, the way the soil clumps in the corners, the spot where carrots never grow quite right. There's comfort in that. You try not to breathe too deeply. Your job today, as most days, is simple. Don't die. Not from exhaustion, not from infection, and definitely not from your neighbor's moldy cheese, which he's trying to trade for one of your eggs. Land, livestock, dowries, all of it matters more than love. You were married at 15, barely old enough to grow a beard, and now you're raising kids while still trying to figure out if you're doing it right. You decline politely, though politely, in this case, involves a lot of squinting and pretending you don't understand his dialect. The sun climbs higher, but there's little warmth to it. He tells you, with great excitement, that someone in the next village oversaw a comet and now believes the world is ending. Again, this is the 3rd time this year. You nod, shoo, and briefly wonder if a comet would really be so bad. Still, you're alive. And that's something. You take your lunch break sitting on a flat stone, munching on a hunk of bread that's more crust than anything else. It's been rubbed with garlic, and questionably, a smear of something sour. You pretend it's cheese. Your teeth don't quite agree. Your neighbor, the one who smells faintly of cider and secrets, sits beside you. Here's your historical fact. Tudor peasants rarely lived past their early 40s. That's if you were lucky. And the weird bit? You, personally, keep a sprig of lavender in your tunic. The afternoon drags. Suddenly there's shouting from the path. A group of young men, flushed and stumbling, are dragging a wooden cart. Marriage, in your world, is as much a financial contract as a romantic gesture. The wedding procession passes, trailing laughter and the sound of a lute that's at least 3 notes out of tune. You pause to stretch. Your back protests. Your knees protest louder. And anyway, you've made it this far. You haven't died today. That's worth something. Oh, and here is your scholarly mystery. Historians still debate just how much leisure time Tudor peasants actually had. By the time the sun begins to dip, your hands are numb. Your tunic is soaked with sweat. You pack your tools, pat the earth like an old friend, and limp toward home, one slow step at a time. The cottage greets you with the same creaky sigh it always does, as if disappointed you survived another day. Inside, the fire's down to embers again. The children are arguing about who got more crust at breakfast, and your spouse is stirring something in the pot that smells aggressively beige. Not because anyone expects to be full, but because no one wants to be seen as greedy. You ladle out a modest portion and pass the bowl to your eldest. She does the same for her siblings. By the time it gets back to you, there is barely enough for 2 mouthfuls, which is just enough to trigger your stomach's disappointment. You lower yourself onto the wooden bench with a grunt, the kind that travels up your spine and out your mouth like a dying accordion. One child gathers kindling. Another empties the chamber pot with the dramatic flair of someone wronged by the universe. You scrape the table, which is really just a board on 2 barrels, and sweep the floor with a bundle of tied twigs. It's not clean, exactly, but it moves the dirt around in a way that feels productive. The texture is enthusiastic. The flavor is mostly turnip with a faint hint of regret. The chickens are fine, though one is missing a few feathers and looks at you with deep suspicion. The pig grunts when you enter, demanding food and attention in equal measure. Diaries are rare, and most records come from those watching from above. Not that there's much to protect. A spoon, a threadbare cloak, 1 wooden cup. But it's yours, and that makes it precious. You sit down on the edge of your straw bed, pull the blanket over your knees, and let out a long breath. Outside, an owl hoots. Inside, someone snores. But folklore, songs, and tailies suggest that humor, dark, dry, and occasionally absurd, was a lifeline. You see it in the ballads, the riddles, even in the jokes carved into pews. It's how people stayed sane, or at least distracted. You tell them a story, something about a talking fox who outsmarts a greedy baker. It's the same one your father told you, and probably the same one his father told him. The heat barely reaches your knuckles, but it's better than nothing. You share a glance with your spouse. No words, just the mutual understanding that tomorrow will be exactly like today, if you're lucky. If not, you'll be 1 blister closer to a priestly visit and a pine box. They laugh at the wrong parts, but you don't mind. Laughter is rare and valuable, like coins you don't have to pay rent with. You toss her some peelings and scratch behind her ears. She's the only creature who doesn't judge your tunic. You smile at your youngest, who is proudly balancing a piece of cabbage on his nose. The village settles into its nightly rhythm. Low voices, flickering light, the occasional shout of someone who's had too much cider and not enough sense. It's impressive, but it won't get him out of bath night. It's why you always clear the table, why crumbs are swept into the fire, and why you never, ever leave milk uncovered. Your neighbor swears he once saw a ghostly monk sipping from his bucket. He also swears that onions cure curses, so you take it with a grain of salt, or a handful if you're rich. Dinner is ready, but not in a way that makes anyone smile. It's pottage again, that eternal Tudor stew that never truly ends, only changes slightly depending on what's available or still edible. Today's version contains turnip, onion, 2 wilted greens, and a questionable bit of leftover barley. There's also a bone, more for morale than flavor. Most meals were grains, vegetables, and occasionally dairy, but even that depended on how generous your cow was feeling. Ale, on the other hand, was a staple. It was safer than water, and even children drank a weak version called small beer. Your family brews it in a cracked bucket behind the house. It smells like wet bread and old socks, but it does the job. You suspect it's been in there for weeks, passed down like a family heirloom. Everyone gathers around the pot, bowls in hand, waiting to see who's brave enough to scoop first. It's a tense ritual. You take your share, sit back, and chew slowly. Now, here's your historical fact. Tudor peasants rarely ate meat. It was expensive, reserved for holidays, or borrowed from richer tables. Your wife refills the pot with a bit of water and a dash of salt, then sets it back to simmer. The pottage lives to fight another day. After dinner, chores begin again. Then you check on the animals. The goat, as usual, is plotting something. Outside, the sky has turned a soft purple. Smoke rises from a dozen chimneys. You head back inside and tuck the children into their shared mattress. It's not comfortable, but they're tired enough not to care. And now, the bizarre detail. Some Tudor families believed that food left uneaten after sunset could attract wandering spirits. You sit by the fire and rub your hands together. And here as your scholarly mystery, historians still puzzle over how peasants mentally endured such monotonous hardship. Before bed, you check the locks. You've eaten. You've worked. You haven't died. Again, as you lie down, the itch returns. The fleas are feeling lively tonight. You scratch, grumble, and close your eyes. The cottage settles around you. Tomorrow, the field will need sowing. The goat will escape. The stew will be reheated. But for now, you sleep. Sort of. The bell rings long before you're ready. Its clang rolls through the village like judgment itself, slow and heavy, echoing off the frost-covered fields and the muddy thatch. You blink yourself awake, still sore from yesterday, still itchy from the ever-faithful fleas, and absolutely not in the mood for salvation. The air inside is colder than outside. You find your usual seat, the one behind the pillar that blocks half your view, but conveniently lets you nod off without being noticed. But it's Sunday, and that means church. The priest paces dramatically, robes swishing, voice rising and falling, like he's auditioning for a role he gave himself. These proxies would sit and nod and look devout on your behalf. A few even became local celebrities, praised for their ability to stay awake through 3 back-to-back sermons without drooling once. He lists with alarming enthusiasm all the ways you've probably doomed yourself. Working on feast days, failing to kneel properly, looking at someone else's turnips with envy. Partially from guilt, mostly because the bench is made of wood, so hard it feels personal. You wonder if you'll be damned for spilling your ale last Thursday, or for cursing at your pig when she knocked over the milk. Probably both. The priest seems to think eternal punishment is the natural consequence for not attending midweek vespers. Some historians argue the sermons were more background noise than transformative theology. Others suggest that fear of damnation shaped daily choices in ways no law ever could. You, personally, believe both things at once. Outside, the wind picks up. You hear the distant clang of the church bell again, even though no one rang it. You follow the rules mostly. But you also whisper thank yous to the old oak tree near your field, just in case. You count at least 6 sins before he finishes the opening prayer, a mix of gratitude and negotiation. You thank God for keeping your cow alive and your children loud. You promise to be better next week. Less swearing, more kneeling, fewer impure thoughts about that traveling tinker with the good boots. Or rather, the awkward mingling outside where people pretend not to gossip while very clearly gossiping. You hear someone whisper about the miller's daughter and the apprentice blacksmith. Scandal, delightful. You file it away for future use. You pull on your cleanest tunic, the one with fewer holes and only a faint smell of mildew, and splash a bit of cold water on your face. You decide to stick with limping and the occasional prayer to St. Giles. He blesses you all, reminds you about almsgiving, and subtly hints that the collection box is feeling neglected. You drop in your last penny. It was supposed to go toward mending your shoes, but you'd rather not risk divine retribution or a suspicious visit from the bishop. Not to feel refreshed, but so the priest won't glare at you from the pulpit. Your spouse straightens your collar, and you nod at each other like battle-weary soldiers heading into a war of silence. Incense and poorly muffled stomach growls. The fire's still warm. Your youngest is snoring with her mouth open. You close your eyes and drift, one hand tucked under the thin pillow, the other resting protectively over your chest, just in case your soul tries to escape mid-dream. You walk with the rest of villagers down the muddy path to the church, a squat stone building that smells like damp books and ancient breath. You take a small piece, chew it slowly, and watch the dust catch the light through the cracks in the wall. There's peace in that moment, or something close to it. Today's sermon is about sin. But really, when is it not? You glance around. Your neighbor is nodding solemnly, though he spent last night cursing at a duck. A child sneezes 3 times in a row and looks mildly panicked, as if his soul might slip out of his nose any second. Here's your historical fact. Religion in Tudor England wasn't just belief, it was law. Attendance at church was mandatory, and missing it could earn you a fine or worse, suspicion. The line between spirituality and social control was so thin it might as well have been a communion wafer. The Reformation had left everything tense too. One year your priest preached loyalty to the Pope. The next year he was burning old icons in the square. You learned to nod, no matter what was said. And here's the fringe detail. Some people, desperate to appear pious, hired professional stand-ins to take their place at multiple church services. Back in your pew, the sermon turns to hell. Fire, brimstone, eternal groaning. You shift in your seat. After the service, there's the dance. Someone mentions a new miracle cure, boiled nettles for gout. Someone else says it's nonsense and recommends urine instead. Then the priest emerges, smiling as if he's just won a personal contest. Now comes your real Sunday reward, a nap. You head home, dodging chickens and mud patches, and collapse onto your bed. The afternoon passes slowly. You wake to the smell of bread. Someone must have borrowed flour, because there's no way you had any. Here's your scholarly mystery. While records show that church attendance was high, it's still debated how deeply the average peasant internalized all the religious doctrine. That night, you say your prayers. Your spouse joins you. Together, you tuck in the children, stoke the fire, and crawl under the blanket. You close your eyes. Tomorrow, it's back to the barley. It starts with a trumpet. Not a proper one. More like the wheezy horn your neighbor carved from a sheep's bone and insists on blowing whenever anyone remotely important enters the village. And today, someone important has arrived. You hear the clatter of hooves on cobblestone and the low rumble of discontented villagers gathering near the square. You groan before you even sit up. His boots are polished, his robes freshly brushed, and he's carrying a ledger, so thick it probably has its own chapter on how much you personally owe the crown. He waves, smiling too widely. Everyone hates him, but politely. Tax day. You, unfortunately, have none of those things. The harvest was lean. The goat is dry. You step up like a condemned man, holding out a small cloth bundle. Inside, 3 onions, a handful of beans, and 1 perfectly preserved molar. The children ate the only decent cheese 2 days ago, during an unauthorized celebration of life. Hundreds. Fat, wriggling, angry eels transported in barrels, which allegedly burst once in transit, flooding a tavern. A young man behind you gets fined for underreporting his cider production. An old widow tries to argue her cat counts as livestock. The crown takes and takes, and you're left wondering how you're supposed to feed a family on leftovers and hope. The steward frowns, flips a page in his book, and says, "Only if it lays eggs, Margaret. They won't do anything, of course. Just threats over warm drink." But still, the word uprising has been floating more often lately. You pretend not to hear. You have turnips to check on. And sparking the first and only documented case of a drunken eel riot. You're fairly sure the steward would take eels over your beans. Others say it was exploitative, designed to bleed the peasantry just dry enough to keep them dependent, but not dead. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Just enough cruelty to stay legal. Just enough mercy to prevent open revolt. You feel this truth deep in your aching molars. You shuffle out of bed with the grim determination of a man heading to his own hanging. Peasants often paid in kind. That meant livestock, produce, or goods like wool and cloth. And yes, if he didn't have enough, you could be conscripted into labor, or worse, punished for withholding. Excess teeth as payment? Not officially accepted, but given the lack of dentists, not unheard of in barter. 8. Enough for a stew, if you water it down and don't tell the kids. Your children are already at the window, watching the royal steward's horse make an awkward attempt to drink from a trough that's mostly mud. You shrug, say nothing. Offer the apple instead. She smiles. You pretend that's enough. You ruffle her hair and silently vow not to tell her about the molar you traded. At least not today. You throw on your cloak. It still smells like pickled herring from last week's market, and brace yourself. Out in the square, the steward is setting up shop with all the subtlety of a theater troupe. The villagers queue up, some with sacks of barley, others with eggs, a few with coins jingling like guilty confessions. The steward calls your name, mispronounces it, corrects himself with a smirk, and beckons you forward. He raises an eyebrow. "Payment," you say flatly. "Creative," he replies, jotting something down in the ledger. You can't tell if he is impressed or just planning to send someone to investigate your dental hygiene. Now here's your historical fact. During the Tudor period, taxes weren't just about coins. And here is the fringe detail. One village in Devon supposedly paid part of its royal tax in eels. Not just a few. Back in the square, the mood is souring. She does not take that well. You slink away before anyone asks you for more. You've escaped, technically, though your stomach is twisting with that familiar knot of shame and resentment. You pass the alehouse, where a few villagers are already nursing mugs and muttering about rebellion. As you walk home, you spot your eldest digging through a compost pile. She holds up a bruised apple with triumph. Now here is your scholarly mystery. Some historians argue that the Tudor tax system was actually efficient and relatively fair, considering the time. That night, you count your remaining beans. Your spouse asks what happened at the square. And outside, under the brittle stars, the steward rides off toward the next village, ledger full, belly round, completely oblivious to the quiet curses whispered behind every door he passes. You fall asleep that night, dreaming of eels. Night in the village settles like a wool blanket pulled over too many feet, heavy, scratchy, and slightly damp. The air inside your cottage is warmer now, thick with the smell of ash and stewed greens, with just the faintest trace of goat. You stare into the last few flickers of firelight and pick at your nails, too tired to stand, too sore to lie down. Your children are piled together like embers in the corner, snoring and twitching, each curled into the next, like they were born to share space and body heat. One of them kicks in his sleep. You don't flinch. That foot's gotten you in the ribs a dozen times before. You sit at the edge of your bed, the old wooden frame creaking in protest. Your knees crack like kindling as you shift. The barley you didn't finish planting. The beans you traded instead of saving. The time you said something sharp to your daughter, and she didn't meet your eyes for 3 days. The remedy? Sleep with iron under your pillow. You tried it once. It gave you a crick in the neck and a nosebleed. So now, you just mutter a quick apology to any passing spirits and hope they leave you alone. In the silence, the mind stirs old bones. You smile. Even dreams, it seems, are made of dirt and debt. Sleep is coming. But it never comes easily. There are theories, of course, that dreams reflected their daily fears, that visions of angels or demons were shaped by sermons and sins. But with so few records, it remains speculation. Maybe they dreamed of flight, maybe of meat, or maybe, just maybe, they dreamed of nothing at all. A quiet dark, a stillness, a rest they never truly got while awake. You close your eyes and picture it perched on the fence post, feathers puffed, watching over your land like a sleepy sentinel. You think of your mother, who could stretch a cabbage into 5 meals and still offer it with a smile. You wonder what they'd think of you now, lying here in a tunic you haven't washed in 3 weeks, hoping your teeth stay in long enough to not be counted as coin. First, the scratching. Somewhere near the corner, beneath the floorboards, a rat announces its presence. Then another. You tell yourself it's just one rat, that he's lonely, maybe composing a tiny symphony down there, and not dragging away one of your boots for nesting purposes. You lie back slowly, ears straining, blanket up to your chin, like it can protect you from the knowledge that your house has roommates. This is when the regret rolls in, soft at first, then steady. You think of your father, who worked the same land, cursed the same taxes, and told the same mad jokes. Here's your historical fact. Many Tudor peasants slept in shifts. Because of space, because of chores, or because there simply weren't enough blankets to go around. It wasn't uncommon for people to wake at midnight, tend the fire, say prayers, or even sneak in a bit of gossip before drifting into a second sleep. The night wasn't one long block of unconsciousness. It was a series of drifting, waking, and shifting limbs. And the bizarre detail? Some believed that sleep paralysis, that terrifying feeling of being awake but unable to move, was caused by a witch sitting on your chest. Across the room, your spouse turns in her sleep, murmuring something about barley. The wind scratches at the window. The door creaks without moving. A nightjar calls from somewhere near the fields. And here's your final scholarly mystery. No one really knows how peasants dreamed. You pull the blanket tighter. The rat scratches again. Still, sleep comes. Slow and reluctant, like a dog called in from the rain. And you let it take you. You've worked. You've paid. You've survived. For one more day. Tonight, as story number 3, might make you squint into the darkness and feel an ache in your lower back that I send even yours. We're drifting into the daily grind of a medieval peasant woman, where sleep is brief, breakfasts are burnt, and the job list starts before the rooster gets the memo. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and the local time. The bed is straw. Not a mattress stuffed with straw. Just straw. And someone else's elbow is in your rib cage. Probably the toddler's. It's pitch black, except for the moonlight slicing through the slats in the wooden wall. The fire died hours ago. You'd relight it, but that would take twigs, breath, and optimism, none of which you currently possess. I love seeing how many of us are falling asleep to boring history for sleep across the globe. Now, back to the cold, muddy past. You're already awake, though you're not entirely sure you ever fell asleep. There's no chimney, just a hole in the ceiling. You stir the embers, adding thin logs, and tuck the pot over the flames. Porridge today, just like yesterday. And the month before. Mostly barley, maybe a few oats if you're lucky. If it's a feast day, you might add a bit of honey though. You'd probably just lick the spoon it was stored in. You head to the well, hauling 2 heavy buckets that bump against your legs with every step. You place the bowl in front of him, and notice he's already taken your spot by the fire. No words, just routine. A quiet, grinding rhythm. When you reach it, the rope is frozen stiff, and your fingers don't quite obey your brain. You wrestle it anyway, because you need water for porridge, for washing, for absolutely everything. There's another woman there, maybe from 2 cottages down. Again, you don't panic. You just pick her up and shush her while shifting the pot so the porridge doesn't stick. There's no rest, just rotation. She nods, doesn't speak, just beats a sheet against the stone like it insulted her ancestors. You step over the pig, who is napping in a corner of the yard and snorts disapproval when your shadow crosses his face. Another has lice again. You braid their hair, swat at fleas, and give them leftover porridge. So you nibble on a crusty heel of bread, so dry it could double as a roof tile. You swallow without chewing properly. There's work to do, and time doesn't wait. A whole week's worth, soaked in lye and river water. These are your rewards, not riches, not recognition. Just small flickers of grace, tucked between exhausting hours. You beat it on a rock until your knuckles split. Your fingers go numb, then tingle, then ache. Which is the same as lunch. Which is the same as every other day. You're boiling greens, slicing turnips, grinding grain. Your fingers are rough, your nails chipped, but your cuts are precise. Practice makes permanent. There's a myth that medieval people didn't wash, but you're scrubbing tunics that reek of sweat, animals, and childbirth. Evening is creeping in, but your day is far from over. They're still weaving, mending, feeding the animals one more time. Again and again. You tell them not to cry over its coldness. You were lucky to have it warm, after all. You scatter seed like some medieval Disney princess. Only your birds don't sing. They squawk, bite, and flap in a frenzy that raises dust and scratches. The kind that smells like goat, sounds like coughs, and tastes like burned crust. It's stiff with old sweat and ash, and something unidentifiable that might be turnip stew. You step outside barefoot, dodging the pile of animal droppings someone said they'd clean up tomorrow. If anything, it's a polite understatement. Still, you rise, because that's what's expected. And because the cow won't milk itself. You throw on the same linen shift you wore yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. There's no sun yet. Just a bitter wind that slices through your clothes like needles. You curse in your head because you can't do it out loud. There are children sleeping on the floor, and one of them is snoring into an empty flour sack. This is what boring history for sleep often forgets to mention, just how much everything depended on you not collapsing. Back inside, you start a fire. The flint sparks are moody. The tinder is damp. When the fire finally catches, the smoke chokes you. Your husband wakes and mutters something about needing to be in the field soon. He scratches, stretches, and waits. That's the strange comfort in all of it. After breakfast, it's off to feed the chickens. And still, you manage a small smile. Why? Because one of the hens finally laid again, and you pocket the warm egg like it's treasure. Now the children are up. They're cranky. One wet the bed. This is the kind of boring history that doesn't make it into books. The laundry comes next. This might be a good moment to remind you that the phrase grueling jobs of medieval peasant women wasn't an exaggeration. You pause at the edge of the river to stretch your back. The water's biting, the wind worse. By the time you return home, your hands are pruned. Your arms feel like they belong to someone twice your size, and the baby's crying. Somewhere along the line, your stomach growls. You realize you haven't eaten since before dawn. And yet, through it all, you notice little things. The way the sun filters through the thatched roof, the soft coo of a dove outside, the fleeting sweetness in your child's giggle. Before long, it's time to prep for dinner. You glance out the doorway as the shadows stretch across the yard. And as you stand there, stirring the pot with one hand while rocking a cradle with the other, you think just for a moment that maybe tomorrow you'll sleep until sunrise. You won't, but it's a nice thought. You head outside again before the sky has made up its mind about staying dark or turning blue. The mist hangs low over the ground like a wet blanket someone forgot to wring out, and your toes immediately sink into the mud. Not that you were expecting anything different. This is spring planting, after all wet, heavy, and never-ending. Your knees hit the ground with a familiar squish. The earth is thick with last season's decay, the scent of compost wafting up in waves that would make a modern nose weep. It's warm, which is disturbing, and you try not to think about what exactly makes it that way. No lute-playing bard ever strummed a tune about Elspeth, queen of compost. These fields soaked with sweat and seasons are your domain. You know every bump, every worm trail. Others say they were there, elbow deep in soil, right alongside the men. Judging by the ache in your spine and the calluses on your thumbs, you're firmly on team elbow deep. You know where the soil's too rocky and where it'll drink water like a drunkard. You look up and spot something odd, a single shoe, hanging on a branch. It's wooden, cracked, child-sized. Sweat trickles down your back and cools beneath your neck scarf. You rewrap it tighter and keep digging. There's no shade in the field, unless you count the donkey who decided to stand perfectly still in the exact spot you were about to hoe. How it got there, no one knows. Maybe the wind, maybe a bird, maybe some kid had enough and flung it toward the heavens like a protest against chores. You even know when the crows are bluffing. That's an art. Yet this is the work that fed whole villages. It was quiet, unglamorous, and constant. You just sort of appear at the doorstep, arms scratched, shoulders aching, legs wobbling like boiled carrots. The porridge is fused to the bottom like medieval cement. You scrape it out with a flat stone and say nothing. There's no time for scolding, only salvaging, a surprise. She pulls it out of flower crown, dandelions mostly, crushed and uneven, but clearly made with love. She places it on your head and runs off giggling. Your cheeks are sunburned, there's mud on your nose, and your eyes look older than your age. But you're alive, fed, useful. One of the kids leans against your shoulder. You don't move. You don't want to break the moment. Outside, the wind picks up, rustling the thatch above. Somewhere out there, that one weird shoe still hangs in the tree. You imagine it swaying gently, back and forth, like it's rocking the whole village to sleep. You carry a cloth pouch with old cheese and onion wrapped inside. The cheese smells like feet. The onion smells worse. You nibble anyway. Your stomach's not picky. You've trained it. You weren't just a planter. You were a walking food insurance policy. The tools need to be cleaned, and the fence has a hole where a pig might squeeze through. You patch it with twine and muttered prayers, then glance over the fields with eyes half-lidded from exhaustion. The cows have been generous lately, or careless. Either way, your hands are brown by mid-morning. your nails lined with grit, and your forearms itchy with sweat and hay dust. You're planting turnips today. Again. You'd think after all these years, your body would have found a shortcut. But no, each seed gets its own little hole. Each hole dug by your cracked fingernails. Each motion followed by a backstretch you never quite finish. She's dragging a bucket of gooseberries and 2 screaming toddlers. You wave, but your shoulders are already arguing about the motion. One of them cracks loudly. You pretend it was just a bird. And you're not just planting seeds. You're massaging manure into the soil. Barehanded. Welcome to boring history for sleep, where the past isn't grand, it's grimy. At some point, a neighbor trudges by and offers a nod. This is the job no one writes ballads about. And here's the twist. Despite all this filth, all the flies, and all the back pain, you feel something close to pride. There's a weird scholarly debate about just how much medieval women worked in the fields. Some historians argue they mostly stuck to home chores. You stop to stretch, balancing on one knee, your other foot squelching as it tries to detach from the muck. You laugh a little. That's your fringe detail for the day, a medieval mystery shoe suspended in a tree like a folk art protest. Lunch is a concept, not a meal. The sun finally emerges in full, but instead of offering comfort, it feels like punishment. He blinks slowly, almost judgmentally, and refuses to move. You sigh and work around him. That's when your youngest daughter appears, barefoot and wild-haired, holding something behind her back. You keep working, your fingers deep in the manure-laced soil, now crowned like a queen of dirt. It's absurd. It's perfect. And if that doesn't qualify as boring history for sleep, I don't know what does. By late afternoon, the planting is done, but the work isn't. You don't really remember walking back to the house. Inside, it smells like something's burning. Turns out one of the older children tried to help with dinner. The pot is blackened. Later, as the animals are fed and the children quiet down, you catch your reflection in a bucket of water. And for a peasant woman in this century, that's saying something. You settle onto the floor by the fire, feet stretched out, toes sore and tingling. The sun isn't even up, but your stomach already knows what's coming. Not hunger, no? You've made peace with that. It's anticipation. Because today is baking day, and while the idea of fresh bread might sound cozy to someone centuries from now, it's more like a bundle of damp twigs that have been rained on, dried, rained on again, and now smell faintly of mold and rat pee. It eats fire like a dragon and gives back uneven heat, so you have to guess what's ready and what's raw. There's no timer, no dials. Just instinct, burn marks, and that one spot in the back corner that always incinerates everything it touches. You pick the third, whisper an apology to the hen who laid it, and keep moving. There's cheese to sniff, milk to skim, and herbs to dry. You shout something vague about chores and miracles, then turn back to the bread. Others say only on feast days. Judging by the flour stains on your skirt and the burn on your thumb, you read clearly in the daily or bust camp, because no one gets third-degree burns for a once-a-month snack. It's time. You reach into the fire pit, carefully using a charred paddle, and slide the first loaf in. It sizzles before it lands. A good sign? Maybe. Or maybe the dough screamed in pain. Hard to say. The air smells like thyme, smoke, and something vaguely suspicious you choose to ignore. You blow into the ashes, coaxing a stubborn ember to wake up, and after 5 minutes of gentle curses and aggressive wheezing, flames crackle into life, which is tied back with a strip of linen, so stained it might once have been white or blue, or possibly part of an old tunic. One's proud and tall, another's flat and bitter-looking. A third appears to be judging you. You taste soot on your tongue. You cough, but gently. The baby's asleep in the corner. But you're done. Kind of. Yours? Maybe. You'll find out later when someone pulls it from their mouth like a medieval fortune cookie. Bread with dried peas, or bread with cabbage stew, or just bread with slightly less stale bread. The kids will complain. You'll raise an eyebrow. They'll quiet down. But in that moment, the woman who spent the whole day bent over smoke, who fought sour milk and smug husbands, gets to win. You have to half the village relies on you. Your cousin's family, the sick neighbor, the widow down the road. Still warm. Still soft inside. You'll tear it apart, hold it to your lips, and whisper a single word. Their ovens are broken, their firewood too damp, or their luck too sour. So you bake. Not because anyone asked, but because that's what women do here. They fill the cracks no one else sees. You know it means a full morning sweating beside an open flame while inhaling enough ash to season a small village. He offers a grunt of approval and asks when it'll be ready. The fire roars, your armpits drip, and the smell of burning crust lingers in the air like a ghost. One of the loaves explodes. Too much air in the dough. A rookie mistake only. You're not a rookie. You just had 5 things to do at once, and no one to hand you a break. It's warm and slightly metallic. Still, it's wet, and that's what matters. You resist the urge to fling a spoon at him, not because you're above it, but because it's your only spoon, and it's already cracked. You gather kindling from the stack beside the hearth. No, stack is generous. Flour, salt, water, a bit of yeast if you're lucky, or sour goat milk if you're not. The flour is gritty. It was milled with a stone wheel that didn't mind including a few pebbles. Typical. You scrape it off and grab the bucket of fermented goat milk to make a sauce, or what passes for one in this century. It's clumpy, slightly fizzy, and has a tang that could peel paint. You grimace, stir it anyway, and pray no one dies today. That's why everyone's teeth are half gone by age 30. You stir the mix with your whole arm, wrist deep in sticky paste that clings like guilt. Eventually, it starts to hold shape, and you knead it on the wooden board your grandmother used. It still bears the scars of her rings and her frustrations. This is your oven, a dome of clay patched with straw and soot, its opening scorched from years of use. You mix the dough next. While the dough rises, you fetch eggs. One is cracked. Another has a weird smell. A fly lands on your forearm. You swat it lazily, then realize your arm now carries both flour and fly. Outside, the children are arguing about whose turn it is to fetch firewood. Here is your scholarly mystery for today. Historians still argue over how often peasants got to eat fresh bread. Some say daily. As you tend the fire, the smoke creeps up your nostrils and into your hair. Your husband wanders in, sniffing the air. Eventually, the first loaf comes out. The top is browned, the bottom is blackened, and there's definitely a bit of hair baked into the crust. You lay the bread out to cool, then start mixing dough for the next round. You pause briefly to sip water. As the day stretches on, the kitchen becomes a sauna. By late afternoon, the baking's done. You've got 12 misshapen loaves lined up on the bench, each with its own personality. You let them cool while wiping your forehead with a sleeve soaked in sweat and flour. Your arms are shaking. Your fingers are stiff. Dinner will involve bread, of course. And then, after the children are fed, the crumbs are brushed away, and the goats are tethered. You'll sneak a bite from the best loaf. Mine. It won't be loud. No one will hear. Even if it's just one bite at a time. The sun is a coin overhead now, dull and merciless. You're already sweating before the work even begins. Today is shearing day, which sounds deceptively serene. They are stubborn, panicky, and prone to sideways sprints that defy physics. You have to hold them just right. Neck tucked, rump planted, legs folded. One wrong angle, and they'll flip themselves out of your grip like a possessed mattress. The biggest one gives you a look side-eye full of doom and bolts. You lunge, miss, trip over your skirt, land in a pile of what you hope is old straw. Every slice pulls instead of clips, and the wool is coming off in uneven, jagged lines. Yes, you might be working with an animal that doubles as your hair care routine. Let that sink in while you wipe lanolin off your forehead. Your back screams. Your wrists feel like they've been replaced with wet rope, and you're covered, head to toe, in fine bits of white fuzz. The water turns murky within minutes, clouds of dirt, grease, and sheep funk swirling around your arms. Your fingernails are blackened. Your apron is soaked. You smell like barnyard stew. You look like you lost a fight with a dandelion. You pause, adjust, mutter something that probably counts as heresy, and keep going. The sun does its work, and slowly the stench fades into something earthy, warm, almost comforting. You run a finger across one patch and smile. This will be spun into yarn tomorrow. You hang it up, pour a trickle of cider into a cracked cup, and collapse beside the hearth. And says, "You didn't knit the sheep this time." You raise an eyebrow. "Much," he adds. It speaks in your grandmother's voice and asks why the socks are still unfinished. That yarn will become socks, scarves, maybe even a new shawl. Some claim it was men's work. Others argue women were heavily involved, especially in poorer regions where every hand counted. Judging by your sore arms and that suspicious patch of wool stuck in your underarm, the answer is clear. You're doing it all. Swirl, slap, rinse. Swirl, slap, rinse. The breeze cuts across your wet arms like a blessing. Birds chirp overhead. And for a moment, standing there knee-deep in dirty wool water, you feel something close to peace. You fight beasts, shape raw earth into sustenance, and wrestle with creatures who think bleeding is a full sentence. You're not trying to win a beauty contest. You're trying to get enough fleece to spin yarn, to make clothes, to trade for salt, to keep the baby warm. At one point you sneeze so hard you almost fall backward. The sheep takes this opportunity to relieve itself. Right there, on your lap? Of course it does. No one saw. Except maybe that same neighbor from earlier, who nods again without comment. She knows. You both know. In theory, it's you, a pair of blades, and a pile of soft wool. In reality, it's bruises, bites, sweat, and the deeply humbling experience of being outwitted by an animal with the IQ of a brick. Every few snips, you wince, either because you caught your knuckle or because the sheep bleated in outrage. Maybe both. The parts where peasant women weren't just workers. They were warriors. You don't fight on battlefields, but you do wage war against livestock with hooves, teeth, and questionable manners. You start by chasing them. Yes, chasing. Because sheep, contrary to pastoral paintings and sleepy lullabies, are not docile clouds of fluff. Eventually, with the help of a passing child and a piece of stale bread used as bait, you wrestle the woolly monster into a sitting position. This part is key. The shears are dull. They always are. You sharpened them last night using a whetstone that's more decorative than functional. They still pull more than they cut. Fluff flies into your mouth, your nose, your eyes. Your hair is full of it. This is the bit boring history likes to gloss over. You get half the fleece off before you realize the blades are misaligned. Let's stop for our bizarre historical detail of the day. In some regions, sheep fat was mixed with ashes and herbs to make a rudimentary shampoo. Now for the scholarly mystery. There's debate over who actually did the shearing. By late morning, you've sheared 3 sheep, but you're not done. Now comes the washing. You lug the fleece down to the stream, haul it into the shallows, and begin the ancient ritual of beating it against flat rocks. Still, there's a rhythm to it, a strange, sloshy melody that's almost meditative, until a leech slithers across your foot. Then peace evaporates. You scream, hop, yank it off, fling it somewhere upriver, and pretend it never happened. Back home, you lay the wet fleece out to dry across a wooden rack that's more splinter than structure. Or it'll be traded for onions. Hard to say. By evening, you're cleaning the shears with a rag that used to be a shirt. Your husband walks in, surveys the fleece drying along the wall, the pile of trimmed wool near the door. You don't respond. Just sip the cider slowly and close your eyes. Later that night, you dream you're being chased by a giant sheep wielding your own shears. You wake up tangled in your blanket, sweaty, confused, and vaguely insulted. Such is the soul-shedding grind of peasant womanhood. And then you do it all again the next day. The evening settles in like a damp cloak. The children have eaten more, or less the fire is back to a polite crackle, and the chores that had to be done are at least less visible. Now comes what you call the quiet work, what someone from another century might call me time. But in your world, it means sewing torn socks by candlelight, while the rat stares at you from the rafters with unsettling intensity. You sit cross-legged near the hearth, the last bit of daylight slanting across your lap. Your sewing basket is an old wooden box that once held dried apples, now stuffed with tangled threads, bent needles, and scraps of fabric that might, if you squint, pass as useful. You pull out a sock that used to belong to your cousin's eldest, where no one spills, breaks, or bleeds. The quality of your stitching could raise your status, earn favors, or get you invited to help with a wedding garment. Wax drips onto the table, hardening into yellow puddles that you'll scrape off tomorrow. Probably. A fire pops. A log splits. Somewhere behind you, the rat finally retreats with a squeak that sounds suspiciously smug. Some girls even embroidered secret symbols into clothes for protection, little crosses, knots, or fertility signs hidden in the hem. You pause. Maybe you'll add one here, for luck. Can't hurt. A day where the rat blinks once and walks away in shame. Like everything else in your life, you smile at the thought, then return to the sock, stitching in silence. The rhythm as familiar as breath. No words, just warmth. You hand him a hunk of bread, which he eats slowly, blinking in rhythm with the fire. The night stretches long, but your eyes stay heavy. You smooth his hair, pull the blanket tighter, and whisper a lullaby that's been in your family so long no one remembers who first sang it. Not happiness, exactly, but usefulness. That rare kind of peace that comes from knowing you've held the world together for one more day. You flex them, rub them together, and push through the last few stitches. The sock is done, kind of. It's lumpy and the thread doesn't match, but it will keep someone's foot warm. The last storm was cruel. It peeled back the roof like a lid. You had to patch it with moss, cloth, and sheer willpower. You toss it into the basket and pull out another, this one smaller, embroidered with a fading red line. You pause. This one belonged to your brother's daughter. She died last winter. Fever. It has a hole the size of an egg and smells faintly of cabbage. You wrinkle your nose, thread the needle, and begin. The thread snaps. Of course it does. But he ate it anyway, chewing silently as if swallowing pride along with lichen. You almost admire that. You rethread, stab your thumb, bleed slightly, and continue. The candle sputters beside you, casting shadows that dance across the walls. One of those shadows is not dancing, it's real. A rat, sitting on a beam, watching you like it's waiting for its cue. It just shifts shape. You glare. It blinks. You hold a sock threateningly. It does not move. This is the part of boring history for sleep that gets overlooked the moments between battles with the elements, where your enemies are mice, mold, and the ever-growing mountain of things that need mending, not just socks. Tunics, aprons, blankets, even the basket itself. Everything here breaks. Your oldest shuffles over, asking for help with a splinter. You take her hand, examine the finger, and pluck it out with the same needle you were using moments ago. She doesn't flinch. Neither do you. The blood is wiped on your skirt. The needle returns to duty. Constantly. Your job is to quietly, relentlessly, keep the pieces from falling apart. You shift on the wooden stool, stretching your back. The baby stirs in her cradle. That's the thing about women's work, it never truly stops. For a moment, you daydream, not about castles or feasts or gowns. You imagine a day where nothing tears. Now for your historical fact. Textile mending wasn't just common, it was a survival skill. In fact, many women were known by their needlework. You glance at the candle. It's half gone. Your fingers are numb now. You hold the sock for a moment too long, eyes blurred by smoke or memory. Then, slowly, you begin to stitch. Outside, the wind picks up again. It rattles the shutters. The thatch above creaks. You listen for leaks. None yet. You hope it holds. Speaking of moss, remember that moss cake from section 2? The one you made when flour ran out? Your husband still pretends he liked it. He didn't. You finish the sock and tuck it beside the others. There's a pile now. Not perfect, but mended. Your son enters, barefoot and sleepy-eyed. He wraps a rough wool blanket around his shoulders and curls beside you. The candle finally dies. You don't relight it. Instead, you sit in the glow of the fire, listening to the soft breaths of your children, the tick of cooling metal, the shifting groan of the house settling into itself. In this quiet moment, surrounded by patched socks, chewed sleeves, and tiny hands reaching for dreams, you feel something real. And that, in this particular chapter of boring history, is nothing short of heroic. It's deep night now, the kind where silence has weight, and the shadows feel thicker than they should. The fire has dwindled to a soft glow, but you're not asleep. Not really. Your body is still. Your eyes are shut. No fever. No wheezing. Just a stray sound. Maybe from the damp. Still, your breath stays shallow for a while longer. But your brain is already listing the things that might need you before dawn. The baby coughs. Just once. You sit up like someone lit a torch beside your head. You tiptoe across the cold floor, pull the blanket higher over her tiny shoulders, and listen. There's dew on the ground, and the air smells of wet wood, ash, and something sour that might be coming from the pig pen. You don't stop to investigate. You follow the path by memory, hand brushing the fence post as you pass. You glance toward the window. One of them has a hole. You feel the chill before you even step outside. No moon tonight. Only the faint shimmer of stars behind thick clouds. And then, there it is. That soft, unmistakable groan. The cow. She shifts her weight dramatically and flicks her tail like she's punishing you for being late. Though technically, it's still yesterday. Please let me go back to sleep before the rooster starts. You stand there for a moment, eyes closed, breathing through your nose like a monk trying not to scream. You sit on the stool, place the bucket under her, and mutter your usual midnight prayer. Again, you'll stretch what bread you have, maybe add that last sliver of cheese that's gone slightly blue around the edges. She's up, again. You pause at the doorway and look up. You whisper something unpleasant under your breath, find your shawl, and grope for your boots. The grass crunches faintly under your soles. The sheep who tried to bite you. The way the wool clung to your lashes. The cheese that nearly walked off the table. The bread you baked for everyone but yourself. The rat that watched you sew, like some cursed guardian of tattered cloth. Pale, flickering, like someone scratched it into the sky with chalk. Who stitched, sewed, scrubbed, and served. In silence, in rhythm, in dark. You stare at it for a moment, then step inside. You duck through the low doorway and immediately step in something warm and squishy. Before the rooster. Before the sky even considers dawn. And you'll rise again, like you always do. Not for glory, not for thanks, but because it must be done. The warmth feels like forgiveness, or maybe just exhaustion. You don't look down. You just sigh. The barn is crooked. Always has been. The cow is waiting, or more accurately, sulking. Please don't kick me. Please don't step in the bucket. You clench your jaw, mutter something ancient and unrepeatable, and keep going. It's not poetic. It's wet. It's rhythmic. It's weirdly intimate. The milk hits the tin with a soft patter. You feel the steam rise. Your fingers cramp, but there's a strange comfort to it, like a lullaby made of motion. The milking begins. Then thwack, her tail hits your cheek. You flinch, the bucket tilts. A few precious ounces spill into the dirt. This is boring history at its most raw. The kind that happens in shadows, where the only witness is a grumpy animal and your own stubbornness. You finish the milking. Barely. As you stand to leave, the cow shifts again and knocks over the bucket with her back leg. There's no backup milk. You'll fetch water and make barley stew for breakfast. You walk back toward the house, the bucket now empty, your hands cold, your temper somewhere under the haystack. A thin sliver of moon has broken through the clouds. The children are asleep, your husband snoring gently. You crawl back into your place by the fire, curl into yourself, and stare at the embers. You think back to all that's happened today. The icy well water, the mud that clung to your shins, and the prayer you whispered while milking, which still rings faintly in your head. Please let me sleep just a little while longer. But even that's a luxury, because tomorrow, or rather today, will begin the same way. And that's what makes this history worth telling. Not the castles or crowns, but the women who held the thread between centuries, who kept the pots stirred and the fires lit and the children breathing. Because if you didn't, who would? All right, settle in. Tonight, story number 4 might make you squint into the darkness and wonder what it really meant to be powerful. We're drifting back thousands of years, where the desert heat hums like a lullaby and the gods wear eyeliner. There's no breeze, just silence and the sharp metallic scrape of a flint blade being dragged across crocodile teeth. You blink. A priest, shirtless and solemn, is hunched over a tray of them jagged yellowed fangs being polished like fine jewelry. She didn't just manage royal affairs in the absence of a male heir. She was the heir. You might think that made her powerful. It did, and it didn't. There is an old carving worn almost smooth now that shows Sobonferu wearing a ceremonial wig under the pharaoh's crown, standing beside a crocodile rising out of the Nile. Real or metaphorical? Hard to say. Egypt blurred those lines deliberately. She might have ruled from a throne flanked by living crocodiles, or it might have just been poetic license. Either way, it worked. The facts are only half the story. The other half is the silence between them. Protection charms, amulets, maybe even a royal accessory. A narrow alabaster statue stands near the wall. It's headless. The nameplate is broken. But based on the shape of the headdress and the placement of the hands, scholars believe it was Sobonferu. There is a theory that she was buried in the northern extension of her father's pyramid at Masguna, but no burial chamber has ever been found there. Empty halls, unfinished rooms, a royal riddle carved into stone and forgotten. If true, it's one of the only surviving statues of her. If Sobonferu had been a failure or a threat to someone's legacy, it would have taken only a few decades to scrub her from memory. The fact that she survived, even in fragments, says something. There are more queens waiting, some stranger, some louder, and some that history tried even harder to bury, mixed with honey and inserted as a paste. If you think that's a joke, go look up ancient Egyptian birth control. Or don't. It'll haunt your dreams. But the point is, queens often had to balance public image, fertility myths, and raw political theater all at once. So Benferu leaned into it. She wasn't the beautiful consort in the background. And skeptical generals, all while pretending that the linen beard strapped to your chin made you king, enough to be obeyed. Egypt was built on illusion, yes, but it was also ruthlessly pragmatic. If she couldn't hold power, they would have replaced her. Quickly. She was the central figure in a world where gods had animal heads in history was a performance. And standing nearby, half in shadow, a queen with thick black braids and a linen gown that whispers with every movement. Her predecessor, Amenhotep IV, possibly her brother, or husband, or both. It gets murky, left no clear male heir. Scholars argue whether her ascension was a desperate measure or a strategic one. Some believe her reign was a stopgap, a kind of political band-aid. Others suggest she was always in the shadows, waiting to emerge when the time was right. She watches the ritual not as a guest, but as its center. You're in ancient Egypt now, but forget the big names. No pyramids, no golden tut. Tonight, we are redigging through dusty corners and peeling back layers of sand to meet the queens you probably weren't taught about in school. The ones left out of scrolls. The ones whose power didn't always come with statues. You begin in a courtyard lit by amber sun and surrounded by pillars painted with falcons and lotus flowers. This is Queen Sobenfiru. You're going to forget how to pronounce it within 5 minutes, and that's okay. Most people already have. She ruled Egypt at the end of the 12th dynasty, just as the kingdom was beginning to unravel like old papyrus. But before it all slipped into chaos, she wore the double crown, the symbol of unified Upper and Lower Egypt, and demanded to be addressed not as queen, but as king. Sobenfeu was the first woman in Egyptian history to formally take on the full pharaonic title. You walk past stone walls etched with her name, though fewer remain than those of her male predecessors. Some were chipped away intentionally, others simply left to erode. Her reign lasted only a few years, and yet she sparked a precedent that would echo centuries later when another famous woman, one wee Lull, followed her path. But while Cleopatra bathed in milk and drama, Sobenferu wrapped herself in symbolism. One of her royal titles was tied to Sobek, the crocodile god, protective, fierce, unpredictable. To be associated with him was no accident. And here is your first bizarre detail of the night. Crocodile dung was once believed to be a contraceptive. Yep, now, there's some debate about how she came to power. That's the thing with boring history for sleep. You step into another chamber, smaller now, where the air smells of incense and old paint. You reach out, not literally of course, and imagine what it must have been like to sit in council with high priests, foreign diplomats. Instead, she ruled for nearly 4 years. Then just like that, she vanished from the records. No tomb has ever been definitively identified as hers. No grand burial complex with golden boats or jewel-eyed statues. But the silence speaks. When Egypt wanted to erase someone, it didn't burn books. It chiseled away names, defaced statues, reattributed monuments. So here you are, wandering between shadows and half-formed silhouettes, guided by a queen who dared to rule like a man in a world that barely tolerated powerful women, even when they prayed to goddesses daily. And remember, this is only the beginning. You pass through a narrow passageway lined with flaking murals, and suddenly the light changes. You're no longer in the golden age of pyramids. Yes, the name might ring a bell if you ever squinted at a high school textbook or got lost in the Egypt wing of a museum. But you probably weren't told the full story, especially the part about how she ruled, vanished, and then years later was systematically erased like a glitch in a royal spreadsheet. Now, the walls whisper of fractured dynasties and shifting power. The air is thicker here, uneasy. Daughter of Thutmose I, wife to Thutmose II, and stepmother to Thutmose III, who was technically heir. You keeping track? Good luck. Egyptian royal family trees are basically soap operas, but with more eyeliner and fewer happy endings. The kind of place where you don't want to speak too loudly in case the past decides to answer back. This is where you meet Hatshepsut. Her name and monuments remained untouched. But about 20 years later, a campaign began. Her statues were smashed. Her name was chiseled out of inscriptions. Not all at once, just enough to make her feel like a rumor. Meaning, in temple reliefs, the same guy sometimes shows up twice in the same scene. One of them is secretly her. It's like a visual version of whiteout tape gone wrong. The Egyptians painted the place like a dreamscape, with trees that bled perfume and houses built on stilts. Hatshepsut had a flair for the theatrical. One statue found buried in a pit beneath her own temple had her name still intact. And yet, she remains one of the most powerful figures in all of ancient Egyptian history. Not because she ruled like a man, but because she ruled like herself, with ceremony, ambition, and a quiet refusal to step aside. She was smiling, serene, as if she knew time would eventually remember her, a ghost of a name trying to hold on. Some scholars argue that Thutmose III harbored resentment. Others think it was more calculated a way to reinforce his lineage and erase any confusion about succession. But there's also a darker theory, that the priesthood, growing ever more powerful, wanted to restore cosmic balance. A woman on the throne had tilted things. The scales had to be reset. Her temple walls are full of carvings showing her divine birth, where God's hand picked her from the womb. It wasn't just propaganda. It was myth-making at its most poetic. She was never supposed to be pharaoh, at least not according to the rules. In the early 20th century, archaeologist Howard Carter, the guy who found King Tut's tomb, identified her sarcophagus. But her mummy wasn't found until 2007, stashed in a humble tomb labeled for a wet nurse. They only knew it was her because of a tooth found in a canopic box bearing her name. Yes, a tooth. Royal identification via dental records. History's got a weird sense of humor. No civil war. Somehow, Hatshepsut maintained order for over 2 decades. The embalming methods used on her body were less than ideal, suggesting her death may have been sudden or politically inconvenient. There's even speculation that her organs were removed carelessly, as if someone wanted her transition to the afterlife to be less smooth. Trade routes flourished. Art blossomed. She sent expeditions to the mysterious land of Punt, returning with incense, gold, and what may have been live giraffes. After the death of her husband, Hatshepsut became regent, a kind of royal babysitter meant to hold the throne until the boy king was old enough to rule. But then something curious happened. She didn't step aside. She stepped up, and not quietly. She declared herself pharaoh, took on male titles, and just like Sobonferu, wore the traditional false beard of kingship. But Hatshepsut went even further. She commissioned massive temples, obelisks that scraped the sky, and a mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahari that still makes architects sigh with envy. She even had her likeness carved with broad shoulders and a masculine stance, while still calling herself daughter of Amun. Here's the core historical fact that still baffles scholars. Egypt didn't revolt. No uprisings. No one knows exactly where Punt was. Could have been Somalia. Could have been fantasy. And then, after her death, everything got weird. For the first few years of Thutmose, the third solo reign, this is where the debate gets juicy. Here's your bizarre detail. In the process of erasing her, workers actually replaced her images with those of Thutmose II, her dead husband. But the erasure wasn't complete. Pieces survived. And time did. Now, here's your scholarly mystery. Some researchers believe she may have died of bone cancer. Others think she suffered from diabetes. You imagine the scene? A once great ruler, body laid bare in a chamber not her own, with her name scrubbed from stone, and her story cut from official records. As you leave her temple, the one at Deir el-Bahari, where cliffs rise like guardians and shadows stretch long over limestone, you pass a column still bearing her cartouche, half erased, half proud, and you wonder, was she ever truly forgotten? Or just waiting for the right listener? You, perhaps. You step into a dimly lit hall where flickering torchlight dances across sandstone walls. This place smells of old dust and melted resin. Somewhere nearby, a scribe sneezes softly. You follow the sound until you're face to face with a statue. Golden skin, braided wig, cobra crest. And the most striking part, an elaborate false beard, clearly artificial, strapped neatly under the chin with linen cords. This is Pharaoh Tuauzret. After his sudden and still suspect death, Tuauzret made a move. She declared herself pharaoh. That oval that officially wraps a name in kingly authority? Yeah, she got one. Few women did. Gods had falcon heads. Kings could be women. Women could be gods. It was all about the story you told, and how convincingly you told it. And Tuauzret told it with swagger. Even fewer got to use the red and white crown combo meant to symbolize all of Egypt. But then, somewhere mid-construction, things got weird. Modifications appeared. Decorations were added and removed. In another corner, her image is partially chipped away. It's unclear whether the defacement was intentional or just the usual wear of time and neglect. But scholars debate whether this was a posthumous slight, a political realignment, or simply logistical convenience. Sometimes boring history doesn't provide clean motives, just mess. And eventually, the tomb was taken over by another pharaoh, Siptah, and then later even repurposed entirely. A woman seated on a throne not made for her, wearing a ceremonial beard she had no reason to fake except for the fact that it granted her power. And power, in Egypt, always came dressed in costumes. Or maybe, somewhere deep down, someone decided she deserved to be remembered after all. Hieroglyphics weren't just decoration. They were spells. And Tuauzret wrote her name in every available space, casting herself into immortality whether Egypt wanted her there or not. It sees a false beard strapped to a woman's chin and wonders not. Why? But why not? It's like if someone moved into your apartment, redecorated, and then gave it to their cousin. This one didn't need a beard or a cartouche. She had something else, something even more dangerous in the right hands. But she wore it. And, like her predecessors, she wrapped her face in the visual language of kings, specifically the ceremonial beard. The truth, as always, sits somewhere in the silence. Ramses III would eventually take the throne and begin a whole new dynasty, one that subtly but purposefully stepped over her legacy, like someone sidestepping a broken vase in the hallway. Not regent, not queen consort, not temporary placeholder. Pharaoh. Full stop. The name is faint, but the outline of the cartouche is unmistakable. Someone tried to carve it out, but they didn't finish. As if halfway through the act of erasure, they hesitated. Ramses III, who came shortly after, speaks in inscriptions about restoring order and reuniting the kingdom, which is usually ancient PR speak for someone messed things up before me. Or maybe it's someone pretending not to be her. The lines blur, as always. Tuauzret ruled at the tail end of the 19th dynasty, in a time where Egypt was unraveling faster than anyone could stitch it back together. Famine, court conspiracies, foreign incursions, you name it. It was a political pressure cooker, and into it stepped a queen determined not to be dismissed. She started out as the great royal wife of Seti II, then became regent for a child king whose reign lasted about as long as a mayfly's afternoon. Now, here's the core historical fact. Tuauzret's name appears in the royal cartouche. Egyptians weren't particularly fussed about biological accuracy in their rulers. But history didn't go easy on her. Her reign, short and riddled with drama, marked the end of a dynasty that was already gasping. The succession line behind her was a mess. Here's your bizarre detail. In the Valley of the Kings, yes, that one, they found a tomb that started out belonging to Twosret and her husband Seti II. One section of the tomb still shows in traditional pharaoh attire, presenting offerings to the gods. And here comes your scholarly mystery. Who exactly succeeded Twosret, and how violently did that transition go? We don't know. There are hints of civil unrest, strikes, possibly assassinations. Some Egyptologists think Tusret's fall was a classic power struggle. Others suggest she was scapegoated for larger systemic collapse. But even in that silence, the image of her survives. You pause near a sunken column, where sand has almost swallowed the inscription. Maybe the chisel broke. Maybe the priest got cold feet. Here's the thing about boring history for sleep. It doesn't care about textbook hierarchies. It peels back the layers. It listens for the echoes. You step back out into the torchlight. Another queen waits in the next chamber. She had religion. You slip into a quiet corridor that hums with the faint smell of myrrh. The floor beneath your feet has been smoothed by centuries of sandals and incense bearers. Because while other queens ruled through marriage or regency, this one ruled through divinity. She was the sister and wife of Pharaoh Amosai. Yes, same guy again. Welcome to royal Egypt, and together they kicked out the invaders and reunited the country. Not quite a pharaoh, not exactly a consort, but something even the kings bowed to. God's wife of Amun. That title had existed before, sure, but in her hands, it became a power position. The title granted her enormous wealth, control over temple estates, and command over ritual authority. This was symbolic, not literal, though it hasn't stopped modern conspiracy theories from swirling. You see, being God's wife meant more than just rituals and incense. It meant control over land, grain, taxation. There are records, actual receipts, if you will, of Amos Nefertari overseeing agricultural estates, collecting harvests, redistributing food. She wasn't just a sacred symbol. She was also, in effect, a logistics officer, a supply chain manager in eyeliner. In ancient Egypt, black skin often represented fertility, rebirth, and the rich soil of the Nile. It was an honorific visual metaphor. She was life-giving, eternal, like the river itself, and also visually unforgettable. She was essentially the CEO of Egypt's most powerful religious institution. Later queens, especially during the 25th and 26th dynasties, would revive and wield the title like a scepter. And then remind yourself, they made her a goddess for a reason. It was one of the last truly powerful positions women held as Egypt spiraled toward conquest. But none wore it with the same sacred ferocity as she did. That fine line again. Not king, but queen of the gods. Not a military general, but still capable of redirecting soldiers through the power of a signature. Not a priest, but wielding more influence than most of them dared. She just rewrote them more poetically. Imagine if the Pope and the Treasury Secretary were one person, and she wore a cobalt crown with a side of snake symbolism. And at the far end, seated calmly between two painted columns, is a woman holding a staff in one hand and a bouquet of wheat in the other. Some believe Amos Nefertari co-ruled with her son, Amenhotep I, during a transitional period. Her name appears beside his in official documents. Some even theorize that she had a hand in selecting royal architects, shaping burial customs, and establishing traditions that lasted for dynasties. If that's true, then she didn't just influence a generation. She built the entire aesthetic of Egypt's golden age. Her eyes are painted black, lined with kohl that makes her stare feel even more permanent. Amos Nefertari didn't vanish into temple walls or family trees. She was elevated. Her name was Amos Nefertari. You may not know it yet, but you'll remember it by the end of this haul. Amos Nefertari lived at the very start of the New Kingdom, a time when Egypt was patching itself back together after a messy Hyksos occupation. People worshipped her image in tombs and shrines. Workers in Deir el-Medina, a village of artisans who built royal tombs, left offerings at her statue regularly. They saw her not just as a memory, but as an active, protective force. But here's the twist. When the wars were over and the kingdom secure, she became the first royal woman to hold the title God's Wife of Amun, in a way that actually meant something politically. Here's the core historical fact. Ahmose Nefertari was deified after her death. Yes, you heard that right. Officially turned into a goddess. Her cult lasted for centuries. Now, let's pause for your required bizarre detail. Her image often appeared with unnaturally dark skin. Not just brown, but full obsidian black. But there's something else. Something stranger. This is where boring history tips its hand. When people say ritual, what they often mean is bureaucracy with flair. Now, here's your scholarly mystery. Did she share her son's throne? You move deeper into the corridor, where another mural shows her holding a flail and crook, the symbols of kingship, though she was never officially crowned pharaoh. In the flickering torchlight, her painted face seems to smirk just a little. Here is a thought for your sleepy mind. In a society that worshipped balance above all things Ma'afa, the cosmic equilibrium Ahmose Nefertari didn't need to break rules. And if you're wondering whether the title of God's Wife of Amun continued after her, oh yes, it did. So next time someone tells you Egyptian queens were passive or ornamental, picture Ahmose Nefertari signing a land grant with one hand while commanding a ritual procession with the other. You descend into a shallower chamber now, one that doesn't boast grand columns or towering reliefs. It feels more like a memory than a monument. The air shifts here, just slightly cooler, quieter. There's something tender and unsettling about what's waiting for you inside. Her name is Anktizenamun, and she is barely out of childhood when history drops her into the heart of Egypt as most chaotic family drama. A girl, but his story, his fame, is all death and golden coffins. Anktizenamun's story is what happened when the tomb was still years away, and her husband was alive, and the palace was more a cage than a kingdom. She's small, her face youthful, her head crowned not with gold, but with expectation. But that also means she came from a family deeply entangled in one of the most controversial periods in Egyptian history, the Amarna era, the time of monotheism, the sun god Aten, a religious and political revolution that broke the traditional power structure like a cracked stele. You've heard of her husband, Tutankhamun, the boy king with the shiny mask and the even shinier tomb. A desperate play to keep control in a palace where every advisor had a knife hidden behind polite ceremony. The Hittites agreed. They sent a prince. He was assassinated before he even reached the border. This was less a love story and more a political quick fix. The child pharaoh needed legitimacy. She provided it. Together, they were supposed to represent a return to stability, a fresh start, an end to the Enten madness. Anktizenamun was the daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, which already makes her dynastic royalty. There are theories, of course. Some believe she died in childbirth. Others say she was murdered or sent into religious exile. A girl forced to call gods into rooms to bless rituals she didn't choose. A queen in name and a chess piece in reality. Long enough to write a letter across the desert. Long enough to imagine something else. Still others wonder if she lived out her days in quiet, erased servitude. But her name is largely absent from the grand lists, the ones read aloud in festivals and carved into pylons. What we do know is that the former advisor, takes the throne and marries the young widow, a seal of their union, or perhaps a brief illusion of equality. Because while others build temples and launch naval campaigns, Anktizenamun is remembered for trying to write herself a future in ink, not stone. But you do see her, just for a moment, standing before a mirror, adjusting a headdress that doesn't quite fit, trying to look like power, trying to believe she still had a choice. And that future was stolen. He paints himself beside her in a tomb scene that feels more like appropriation than partnership. She doesn't look happy in it. She looks ... included, like furniture. A necessary backdrop. When Akhenaten died and chaos crept in, Ankhesenamun, probably still in her early teens, was married off to her half-brother Tutankhamun. But behind that smiling painted mask was a system still snarling. Here's your core historical fact. Ankhesenamun likely had little actual power. Most real decisions came from high-ranking advisors, A and Horemheb among them. Men with ambition, military strength, and deeply vested interests in steering the ship, while the boy king played his role. And here's the bizarre detail. A letter reel, preserved and once locked in the archives of the Hittite Empire, was written by an unnamed Egyptian queen, begging for a Hittite prince to come and marry her. Her husband had died, she said. She had no son. She wouldn't marry a servant. She wanted a real king. Most scholars believe the writer was Ankhesenamun. If so, it's a political Hail Mary. Think about that. The Queen of Egypt reaches beyond enemy lines to prevent being married off like property again. And someone intercepts her plans with a blade. It worked. Sort of. Soon after, she disappears from the record. Her name vanishes. No confirmed tomb. No final resting place known. This is where boring history for sleep whispers a little louder. The scholarly mystery? What became of her? And yet, her signature survives on a ring paired with Tutankhamun's. You picture her walking palace corridors lined with reed mats and alabaster bowls. You don't see her leading armies or commissioning temples. And maybe, just maybe, she did for a moment. A soft wind moves through the chamber now, and the walls seem to sigh. Not all forgotten queens wore crowns willingly. Some had them forced on their heads like masks. The tomb that lied about its occupant. The last chamber feels different. Colder, heavier. As though the walls know you're nearing the end, and they're trying to hold onto your feet just a little longer. This is not a room filled with gold or grandeur. It's dusty, sparse, a few broken jars, a faint scent of dried lotus and old linen. But in the middle of it all, resting under layers of time and assumption, is a sarcophagus. And this loop ends with something stranger than fiction. A royal tomb that tried to bury the truth along with the body. It was built for a man, but it held a queen. Her name was Tausrit or Twasrit, depending on your translation, and you've already walked past her once. But history likes to loop. The name itself suggests a boys' club, doesn't it? But deep within that valley lies Kivi 14, a tomb with a secret double life. Then, eventually, she took the full pharaonic titles and ruled as king, for a while, until she vanished. Again, originally carved out for Seti II, it was later appropriated and expanded for his wife, Tausrit. Was she ousted? Did she flee into exile? No inscription confirms it. Others think he sealed off part of the tomb and claimed it for himself. Walls that once sang her name, now muted with replaster and overpainting. To this day, her mummy has never been definitively identified. A queen turned king, buried in someone else's narrative. But after her disappearance, Egypt's next ruler Sutnecht made it very clear that he was cleaning up a mess. His inscriptions speak of restoring order, putting things right. He didn't mention her by name, but his actions did. He erased hers, or perhaps she was always meant to share it. No one's quite sure. The artwork within is a strange blend. Some images depict Seti II. Others show Tausrit in full kingly attire. There are corrections, mismatched styles, overlapping paint. Like someone was editing the past in real time with a nervous brush. Let's rewind a little. It hums in dusty inscriptions and misattributed artifacts. The historians still whisper her name, even if the walls don't. You're in the Valley of the Kings. Yes, kings. A small niche, just deep enough for a flickering oil lamp. No grand statue here. Just a faint sketch on the wall, a woman, arms raised in adoration, standing before the god Osiris. The lines are faint, but the posture is proud. A whispered reminder that boring history, this strange, quiet sleep story you've followed, was written just as much by those who were erased as by those who carved the walls. What we do know is this. When Seti II died, Tausret ruled as queen, then as regent. The tomb tells part of the story, but it tells it badly, as if someone kept changing their mind about who exactly was supposed to be honored here. Queens who never wore the crown, but ruled with grain and ink. And queens who, even in death, refused to disappear. One layer reads, Tausret. The next reads, Sipta. Then, Setnacht, a man who eventually overthrew her memory and claimed the tomb for himself. It's like a royal game of musical chairs, carved in limestone. Here's the core historical fact. KV-14 is one of the longest tombs in the valley, stretching over 100 meters. Now, the bizarre detail. Some cartouches in the tomb were recarved multiple times. And here's your scholarly mystery. Did Tausret die naturally? Some believe he found her body and had it reburied. And that's where you are now, in a tomb that lied, a chamber that promised glory, then reneged. But not everything disappears. Tausret's legacy, like so many of Egypt's forgotten queens, clings to corners. It hides in reused cartouches. You walk to the far end of the tomb. That sketch has no name, but maybe it doesn't need one. Maybe it's not a tomb at all. Maybe it's a message. You step back. The tomb seems to exhale around you. You've seen queens buried in their husband's shadow, queens disguised as kings. You've followed them through incense and erasure, power and pretense, faith and forgery. And now it's time to let them rest. The tomb fades behind you as if it were never there. The air feels gentler now, like cloth drawn over a candle. Your steps slow, not because you're tired, but because the past has loosened its grip. You've wandered through heat and stone, through dynasties and deception. You've brushed against linen beards and ceremonial wigs, glimpsed letters never meant to be read again, and stood before gods that smiled from painted walls. It's in the quiet acts, the forged cartouche, the tilted headdress, the hidden letter. It's in the way a girl queen reached across enemy borders with ink and desperation. Or how a mother became a god, worshipped not for conquest, but for care. And all along the way, there were women forgotten, repainted, rewritten queens who navigated a world that both worshipped and ignored them. They ruled as pharaohs, as mothers, as symbols, as ghosts. Some were erased slowly, one name at a time. Others vanished all at once. And yet, they linger, folded into the corners of history like a secret love letter beneath a palace floor. Maybe that's the strange comfort in it all. That boring history for sleep doesn't need loud battles or famous tombs to matter. Let those stories stay with you tonight. Let your breath slow, like drifting sand. Let your thoughts dissolve into the Nile's soft current. Whatever burdens you carried today, let them sink in the warm silence of ancient halls. You're not in a tomb anymore. You're in a dream. And the queens, the real ones, the ones nobody bothered to teach you about, are already asleep beside you, watching gently, saying nothing, but proud you remembered. Sweet dreams.